Bonjour everyone and welcome back to my channel, The Ways of Your Soul. In today's video I'm gonna be reviewing the GLOWWOOD Oracle, and let me tell you, this has blown my socks off. I'm so excited to be able to present this to you because I've been using it for over a month now and it's been very transformative and very magical. Before we get into it, I actually want to say a big thank you to Emergent Plant Life, the publishers of this deck, who very kindly sent this deck to me. So I did not purchase this deck myself. This video is not sponsored, and as usual, all the opinions I will share about the decks I present are my own. I also want to say a huge thank you to the publisher because they have given me a coupon code for you guys, so if you're interested in this deck you can get 10% off. And in this case the link I'm gonna provide is an affiliated link. We'll make a small commission out of it at no extra cost to you, but of course only if you're interested in the deck. I'm not here to tell you what to buy, I'm just here to present it and tell you how I've been working with it for the past months. And if it is your first time here, hi, my name is Marine, I'm a French tarot reader and a lover of everything tarot, oracle and self-empowerment related. You can find all of my socials in the description box. In the description box you'll find also where to get this deck, all of the information. So without further ado, let's get into the GLOWWOOD Oracle review. So the GLOWWOOD Oracle is a nature-based oracle deck. It's rooted in ecology, which I think is super unique, not something that I've seen a lot, if any, decks based on. We have a lot of plant decks around, we've got a lot of animal decks, but I've never found a deck that is so rooted in the ecological nature, interwoven relationships between the species, plants, soils, mineral, fungi, such as this one. So that's what is so unique, that's what it brings to the table, and that's what really for me made this deck so special. So here is the box, as you can see. It traveled all across the world to me and it was perfectly fine. So this book is very sturdy. Inside there is a brilliant guidebook, which we'll get into. This is amazing and I can't wait to share with you about this. But the cards come here and you can see it's foamed, so it's very well packaged, and like I said, mine traveled across the world and it was perfectly fine. But in the box you are also provided with a bag, and that's actually how I've been using the deck. I've been taking the guidebook out and I've been putting the cards in the bag provided because I've been using this deck all month long and I have been keeping it on my bedside table, and that's just been so practical to be able to carry this around. In terms of production, the cards are matte, which I love, and it's 78 cards, so hello tarot lovers, we absolutely adore that. I love a good chunky oracle deck. The more the merrier, and it means that there's more to get into, and so for me, I love a big oracle deck, you know that about me now. Before we do a flip through, I just want to explain quickly how the deck is constructed. So on each card you're going to see an image of the being that is part of the GLOWWOOD. The GLOWWOOD, imagine it's like a forest. All 78 cards represent a being that could belong to that forest. So already there's relationships there. Some of the beings help each other, some of the beings hinder each other. So already from that there's so much you can draw information on. But the actual structure and configuration of the deck is very clever. You can see on each card you have one of the GLOWWOOD beings. So in this case here we have the stinging nettle, and then here on the sides you can see different symbols. Those symbols are referred to in the guidebook and they are like family, and those symbols are going to really help you to, especially when you're drawing several cards and you're doing a spreads, see which beings are part of the same family or have the same symbology. All of this is explained in the guidebook. They give you an example of what symbols you could find on each of the card, and for me the meanings of the card have been as powerful as the symbols. So I wouldn't sleep on the extra symbols that are being shown here, and I'll show you in the guidebook what they refer to. Before we actually look at the cards, I want to give you an overview of the guidebook because for me this is the most important thing about the deck. The cards are beautiful and you're gonna see the artwork is amazing, but for me the guidebook is where the magic is at in this deck, and personally I wouldn't see myself using the deck without it. purely because I enjoy what the guidebook has to say so much. So first of all, we have an explanation about the philosophy. You have amazing spreads in this particular guidebook, which I'd never seen before, and they're all tailored around ecology, nature. So we have the seed spread. Love that. I've tried it for myself and I've done it for a friend, and it was really informative and really unique. I hadn't seen that before. You represent the shape of a seed. If you are willing to start a new project, if you want to see how a new idea you have, how will that grow, the potential for it, then this is one of the spreads. The branch spread could be when you've already done your project and it's on its way, how it's going to evolve, how it's going to grow, potential challenges for its future. So as you can see, everything is done through the prism of plant life, of insect life, of everything to do with those natural beings and with ecology in mind. So you're really asked to put yourself in nature and remind yourself that just because we're human, we're not apart from nature, even though a majority of our time we might be not in it. I don't think a lot of us live in the forest. If you do, I'm very jealous. That sounds amazing. But there's ways for you to reconnect with that wildness and reconnect with that natural environment and that natural rhythm. And this deck is one of those offerings. So I really appreciate that there was mentions of Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere. If you don't know, I'm in the Southern Hemisphere, so things are always backwards when I read decks. Doesn't always offer Southern Hemisphere option, so I appreciated that it thought about us. And finally we get into the card description. So for each of the card, you don't have the card depicted, but you do have the name of the card, you have the Latin name, you have the type, so is it a plant, is it a fungi, is it an insect, is it a soil, which I believe are the 4 main categories of this deck. You have symbols, so remember, like I was saying, on each card you have those symbols on the side. They will tell you what those symbols are, and we can find them at the back of the guidebook. I'll show you in a second. We have associations. If you think about beings such as a honeybee, for example, you know that this particular being doesn't exist on its own. It has to pollinate certain flowers. So for example, it's going to have association with certain flowers or certain plants. Maybe some insects eat each other. Maybe some insects rot certain things, or fungi rot certain trees. Maybe some of them enhance or reduce, and you're going to find all of that information in the association. It can be very, very interesting, especially when you're doing spreads, to see where are things being enhanced, where are things being taken down. So there's a lot there to gain more knowledge and more insights. And finally, you have a description of that particular being. So here we have the older. So this is kind of like where your message would be. And of course, at the end of the presentation, we're going to pull a card and I'll read you one of the messages. And at the end, you have keywords for each of the card, and I found those very helpful as well. After all of the cards description, you have the categories. So remember I said the deck is divided in certain families. We have fungi, plants, soils, so it's all explained here. And finally you have the symbols, and those are the symbols you can find on the border of the cards. For example, on the honeybee, you see several symbols here on the border. One of them is this cat paw just here, and in the guidebook, on the honeybee page, it's going to tell you what each of the symbols are. The cat paw, I remember, is a helper, so I would go to the helper. Oh, look at me, I got the page right away. And I would read my message about the honeybee, but I could also read what this particular helper symbol represents. In this case, it says facilitating, providing substantial assistance to others. This kind of support is especially notable for disregarding formal boundaries, reaching beyond an inner circle or family, more giving than taking, magnanimity. But of course, that makes so much sense for the honeybee. We know that they pollinate so many flowers and actually help those flowers bloom. And at the end of the video, I will do a sample reading. We'll pull a card and we'll read the message and we'll read the symbols associated so you can have an idea of how everything reads. But for now, let me flip through each card whilst I tell you how I've worked with it, my thoughts. This is definitely a review for me. As I said, I've used this for over a month. I'm into this particular oracle deck from the position of someone who is not at all a plant expert, or at least not the plants depicted here. And that's why I really wanted to do a review of this deck, because I wanted to see, is it approachable for someone that is a lover of nature but not necessarily a connoisseur of all of the plants or fungi or insects, and B, from someone who isn't necessarily even surrounded by this particular flora and fauna. Like I said, I live on the southern hemisphere, and the plants depicted here are not necessarily relating to my environment. Some of them are. The soil is pretty universal, some of the plants, and maybe even some fungi, but in terms of insects, we have slightly different ones. I'm in a tropical climate and that makes sense. What blew me away with this deck was how approachable it is, even for someone like me who, like I said, is not surrounded by this particular environment, but yet the information is presented in a way that it is truly super informative, super helpful, and it invites you into this GLOWWOOD forest, whether you can have the forest near you or not. So that's the first thing I want to say, is how approachable this is, how beginner friendly it is. Of course, if you are a plant lover, if you're an insect lover, a fungi lover, this is going to be amazing for you. But even if you're not, I don't want that to be deterring to you because of how approachable I found this particular deck. What made it so approachable, like I was saying, was the guidebook. What's explained in the guidebook, it's very poetic, very magical. The fact that on each card we have those symbols, after you start using the deck for a while, you start recognizing what those symbols are. So it starts to kind of become a habit, and it's interesting to see what relations those beings are, because I think that's the key to this deck. It's a reminder that we're all connected and we're all part of a bigger thing, and we don't exist on our own. We are breathing the air that other beings have breathed before, and we are surrounded by spores of fungi and have released spores into the air that might be clinging to our skin and to our breath, and so we don't necessarily have to be in nature to be surrounded and part of nature. And this deck reminds you that every single thing is connected to each other, and that everything has a relationship to each other. Whether that relationship is in aiding each other or in using each other, there's still a relationship there. We're not existing on our own. So for me, this deck, even though it doesn't actually speak of magic and folk witchcraft or animism or anything like that, there's definitely like echoes of that there. Again, you don't have to believe in any of that because the deck doesn't actually mention it, but for me there's definitely those echoes of animism and of folk witchcraft here, which is so rooted in connecting with the beings that surround you, respecting the nature that surround you, understanding the animals, the beings, the plants, and even the soil that is beneath your feet. I love the fact that it included soil actually, because, you know, things like snail we might see more regularly in Oracle deck, but actually the card I've been working with right now is the clay card, and that's been so interesting. Here we have the sandstone, the sand. It's been so interesting to work with soil as a energy. What does clay look like? How can I embody clay? And so what does clay look like if I try to invite that energy into my life? And how can I embody clay? Its malleability, its ability to let water seep through it, or on the contrary, to be opaque and waterproof, its ability to change form. And this is invitations that you get with every single one of the beings, depending on the one you're gonna pick. If you are looking for grounding energy, this is absolutely that. It doesn't veer away from beings that are not necessarily the most pleasant, like the spider mite. I'm not a fan, you know, and yet it has message to offer. So I really also appreciated the fact that the deck doesn't just focus on the prettier beings, the one that we're very used to see, like the trees and maybe some like the fern and things like that. It also talks about insects and fungi and things that are a bit more dirty, a bit more wild. So it's a true invitation to connect to your wildness within. It's about decoding natural processes, evolution, dissemination, and it's truly an invitation to look outside of yourself and find where can you get guidance from those beings who are all interwoven with each other, but also with you, because you too are part of the GLOWWOOD forest. The artwork, let's talk about the artwork. I find it very beautiful. I love the fact that it's on a black background. It really pops for me. I straight away, when I'm doing several cards, I know if it's a plant or if it's an insect or if it's a fungi. I think this would pair beautifully with a lot of my more nature-based deck, and I have been pairing it with my tarot decks, But I'm gonna be completely honest, what I've mostly used the deck is been on its own, because for me it's one of those decks that it sings on its own and it doesn't need anything else. There's so much there within each card. If you want to look at every symbol plus the message of that particular card, you have more than enough. This is one of my favorite cards. I absolutely adore Lily of the Valley, and this is the card I'm working with right now, the clay I was telling you about. So like I was saying, for me this is very accessible whether you are familiar with those plants or not. The fact that I managed to connect to this even though 80% of those beings and those plants and etc. are not in my local environment truly means that it goes beyond spotting those beings in the wild and seeing what messages they have. Although if you do have those beings in the wild and you go for a walk in an environment where you can see those, I'm sure it would add extra magic to it and that would make it amazing. But even if you live in a city and your only access to nature is your local park, this deck invites you to come as you are. The fact that it's so rooted in ecology for me means that it's gonna be a deck that can speak to everyone, whether you're very spiritually driven and you hold animistic beliefs and you practice witchcraft or anything like that, or whether you're very scientific and grounded in reality and you don't consider yourself particularly spiritual. For me, this deck is truly a tool for everyone, because if you want to divine magic out of it and use this for guidance and divination, you can. But if you want to use this deck for connecting to nature, understanding natural processes, and potentially seeing how those natural processes and natural events and those beings apply to your daily life, you can do that too. So there's a lot of freedom there and there's a lot of wildness there, and for me truly that is what I found the most appealing. This deck is very poetic in the fact that it reminds us to find beauty in the things that maybe we forgot to find beautiful. Like the mayfly. It's not necessarily the first insect I would think of when I'm thinking of finding an insect to guide me. You usually think about the ladybird or the butterfly. When was the last time you let the mayfly inspire something to you? So I love that versatility about this deck. And we finish with the honeybee. I want to do a sample reading. We're gonna pick a card. Whoever is watching this right now, this can be a guidance, general guidance, or before I shuffle the card, think about a question you want some information on. And we'll read the guidebook. We'll look at the symbols that the card relate to. So let's have a look so you can see how the guidebook reads. What do we all need to know right now? What do we all need to focus on right now? What GLOWWOOD being has something to tell us? Ooh, we have the milkweed, beautiful. I'll read this to you. If you don't want to hear my horrendous French accent, you can pause and read it for yourself. I'll still show you the guidebook. I won't feel offended. So the milkweed are the flower. The symbols are, we have disturbance-driven helper. So remember we talked about the helper earlier. Lighting bulb here, I believe, is the disturbance-driven. We'll look at that later. We have vulnerability and strength and nourisher. So we'll look at those in a bit and I'll show you the symbols, how they correspond to. But the message goes like this. Around this showy, attractive and lofty presence, a dedicated inner circle has gathered. Some depend heavily on the milkweed for support and protection. Some hope it might share methods that would help them successfully defend themselves against aggressors. And yet, this is often what it cannot do for itself. Its appearance and persistence is dependent wholly on the field's vulnerability. It requires disruption to business as usual, leeway, preferential treatment, and does poorly when faced with initial competition, despite possessing numerous tactics to branch out into new areas. It is also easily bruised. However, when its spirit does take hold of a place, it can become tenacious and fierce. And the keywords associated are an absence of distractions, attention is focused on a central figure, in the absence of other large projects, a pampered princess, the royal court, eventually helping others more often than needing others' helps, an hospitable inn, a friend's couch. Before we go into the symbols, if I was to read that for myself or if I had pulled that card for someone else, because I've been using that card for others as well, straight away I would think about our boundaries and potentially how our ability to help others sometimes hinder our ability to help ourselves. What struck me was the fact that, you know, milkweed is easily bruised and so many depend on it for help, but it's not very good at taking care of itself, and yet in the end it has potential for becoming tenacious and fierce. So as you can see, there's a lot of wisdom that you can gain from those messages, and you can easily apply that to your personal life. So potentially you having difficulty putting boundaries in your personal life, at work, in your family, you're not really knowing how to say no right now. You feel bad for not showing up for others. Maybe you feel bad for taking time for yourself. The milkweed could help you work with all of that. Here you can see we have this particular symbol right here with little spikes. It corresponds to defense. It spines on a branch, and it says employing special protective powers, something fortified, secured, a personal shields guard the elements from misuse, abuse, interference. This may be done through language, attitude, encryption, preemptive strikes, physical barrier, in some cases providing others with this protective ability. So remember how we've talked about the milkweed potentially showing you how you need to insert some boundaries and work on your ability to show up for yourself as much as you're showing up for others. Here is one example on the remedy, the solution. Through those symbols, we can get extra information to develop that message. Another symbol present for the milkweed is this particular symbol on the top left corner. It's a mandragora, and this represents the medicine symbol. So the medicine symbol you can find on several plants, which would have some healing properties, and it says healing, especially after a wound or ailment, the capacity to administer a remedy, therapy, rehabilitation after an injury, not necessarily removing the offense, but dealing with its effects. So again, there's something there, that another prism, another key that you could use in your own personal lock to find some information to help guide you, and to understand even more as to what the milkweed has to offer in your life right now. So I love those symbols. I found that for me in my personal practice, and when I've been pulling cards for my friends and stuff, they provided as much information as the actual meaning of the card. So don't sleep on the symbols. You don't need to read them to get the information, but after a while you're gonna get used to what each one means, and it's just gonna add another very beautiful layer. Before we wrap up the reading, I want to say that at the end there is a chronology, a timeline of like the natural evolution of those particular beings. This is again another layer as to how you could read the card. Imagine you get a piece of land and it's brand new. First you would have soil, and so it helps you to understand how things are never set in stone, and how the timeline and how the connection and relationship between all of those beings and us as well is constantly moving, constantly flowing, because nature is constantly evolving, it's constantly moving, it's never set in stone. And so I thought that addition of a layer of understanding was really interesting. So overall, I love this deck so much. I find it very healing, very informative, very approachable, and very poetic. With all that being said, I want to say a huge thank you to you for watching, and to Emergent Plant Life for sending this to me. If you're interested in this deck, again, don't forget that there's a coupon code. You can get 10% off. It's gonna be in the description box below. And until my next video, I'm sending you so much good vibes, and keep navigating the waves of your soul. Bye!